as you can see, this is the web-based version of the report. Another reason why I like this one. The word iron here is a hyperlink. If you click on that, it takes you to food sources of iron, portion
Yeah.
sizes.
Yeah.
So,
That's
so for
wonderful.
me, yeah, so for me, I eat plenty of spinach, tomato, edamame. And in
Mhm.
fact, since I created my report, I'm mindful to make sure I'm eating these foods every week. So
Yes.
I'm eating the foods that have iron. And when I go back up to the top of the card here and look at what symptoms I need to be looking out for, so
Hmm.
that's weakness, extreme fatigue, weakness, chest pain, shortness of breath, and poor appetite. So I'm
Hmm.
eating plenty of the foods. I'm not experiencing the symptoms. So the take home for me is keep doing what I'm doing.
Exactly.
Whereas you were experiencing some of these symptoms, you would know to maybe
Right.
look at your diet, consider a supplement, that sort of thing.
Welcome to I Think I Can podcast. My name is Luella Young. I am a woman who believes that we, like wine, get better with age. Age brings us wisdom, intuition, and a level of sophistication that is beyond the reach of youth. I am here to tell you that living a luxuriously rich and fulfilling life is in your reach. I Think I Can podcast will teach you to think differently in order to get different results. Allow me to show you how to do life effortlessly. This podcast is for the woman who is tired of playing by the rules of society, community, religion, parents, and partners. I Think I Can is all about becoming brave, authentic, purposeful, and strong. Listen weekly, and you will find yourself living a life you could have only once dreamed of. Thoughts drive our physiology, so channel your thoughts with me into a life truly worth living. Enjoy the show. So, welcome back, everyone. We are on episode number 37 of I Think I Can podcast. And today I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Erin Goldman. Now, Dr. Goldman reached out to me, probably over a month ago or so. Just wanted to make me aware of a DNA test, a genetic test that he and his company have co-founded, and it sounded like a great idea, something that I might like in my clinical practice as a functional medicine practitioner. And I guess in our discussions, I just thought, well, heck, why don't you send me over a kit so that I can test myself and we can talk about my results. So that's something that we're going to be doing on this episode. Get ready for that. But before we begin, well, I want to first of all welcome you, Erin,
Yeah, thank you.
and
Glad to be
I
here.
also I want to let everyone know what you're all about. So Dr. Goldman is a co-founder and chief science officer of DNA Labs Canada, a genetic testing company. Erin oversees all aspects of genetic test design, interpretation, and implementation of such tests. Prior to his work at DNA Labs, Dr. Goldman was the Director of Genomics Services at the University Health Network, Mount Sinai Hospital Clinical Genomics Center in Toronto, a state of the art, full service genomics technology facility that provides genomic services such as DNA sequencing and genotyping to the research community. So, again, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's quite an impressive background that you have, I must say. So, let's just start off with what got you into the area of genomics, and let's also define what genomics is for some of our audience. They might not even know what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, we're all walking around with a massive amount of information in our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
I often show a slide in my talks that show that if you stretch out all your DNA that you're walking around with, it'll be like 61 billion kilometers long. It'll stretch to the sun and back 61 times. So it's a massive amount of DNA that we have in each of our cells, and it basically forms a code which instructs your body how to build you, like how you develop, how you function, and how you interact with the environment. And there's actually about 3 billion letters of information in our DNA, and we actually have two copies of our genome, one from mom and one from dad. So that's 6 billion letters that we're walking around with.
Hmm.
And the letters are organized into subunits called genes. And when we talk about the entire complement of genes, that's what a genome is. So it's a bit of a long walk to get there, but basically the genome is all the genes, all the information that's in your DNA. And how did I start? So I was always interested in science growing up. I ended up doing my PhD in molecular biology and genetics
Hmm.
at Yale University. I'm from Toronto originally, went to the States for my PhD, came back to Canada, and as you mentioned in the opening, in my intro, which is very nice,
Mhm.
I ended up running a lab that did genomics as a service. So our lab had all the expensive machinery that most labs don't have, these $1 million sequencing machines,
Mhm.
and we were able to do a genetic analysis looking at one genetic variant in one person all the way up to a whole genome sequence in 10,000 people and everything in between. So we had lots of the tools. So different professors and different researchers and even companies would send their samples to us. We would analyze it and then provide the information back to them. So during that time, when I was working in that space, the cost of DNA sequencing was slowly coming down,
Mm.
and then something called next generation sequencing was invented. And
Mm.
that's like basically going from a typewriter to a computer in genetic technology.
Mm.
So that dropped the cost dramatically to do DNA analysis. The field just exploded, and we learned so much. Not only the cost to get the genetic information became accessible to everyone, but the amount of information that we were learning about was just massive. So we really got a good understanding of how genes work, basically.
Yeah,
Uh,
and yeah, may I just pop in and say that, I did a similar test about 5 years ago. It was a company out of BC, and yeah, I was quite impressed with the additional information that came out in your report. And now, whether or
mhm.
not the other company, is up their game or not, I'm not sure. But like, it was really quite interesting, and I'm going to talk a little bit more on that in terms of a mental health aspect too. So we'll get into that. And
Yeah.
again, just before you go on, I just want to, I just remembered that I made a little video of how to administer the test, because that's something we didn't mention yet. But and I'll link
Okay.
that, in this will be on my YouTube channel, so I'll link it in the show notes, and I'll link it on my YouTube channel. But it's super simple. It's just a cheek swab. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
amazing. Like you can like swab your cheek, and there goes basically your entire code, like in the mail. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 6 billion letters of information that you're walking around with, it's in every cell in your body that has a nucleus. So the easiest place to get it is from the cheek cells. Yeah, you just swab your cheeks, send them
Yeah.
to us, and we
Yeah.
can report back out.
Much better than that beautiful COVID nostril
Right.
swab. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
great. Well, where should we begin? You know, I okay, let me just speak a little bit about you know, I just think that this is an overall great way, because as a functional medicine practitioner, I've really gotten into the reads, I guess you could say. I really got detailed with my health. Like, I mean, I learned about so many specific tests, like gut tests, hormone tests.
Mhm.
Um, what else did I put myself through? There's another one. There's adrenal axis tests
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah. I know there's more. I just can't think of it right now. Well, food sensitivities test. I did a
Right.
specific, and It's all great, but it's also overwhelming. And this actually is sort of a nice little summary. I think it's a great thing to do on so many different levels, but sort of like just on like a foundation. This is me. These are my genes, and these are the things I need to look out for. And then if something like for myself, like one thing that popped up was um let's say, yeah, lactose. I have a lactose sensitivity. I think another thing that came up was, oh, it talked about my cholesterol and being prone to high triglycerides. Well, if I wanted to get even further into that, then I could go to one of these more specialized tests, um, and get more information. But I think this is a great, reasonably priced test to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. So this type of testing, your DNA doesn't change over the course of your
Yeah.
lifetime. So you do the test once, you understand your baseline risks and tendencies. And then those other tests that you mentioned are typically like a blood test or a urine test.
Yeah.
Um, those are snapshots of the day. So
Yes.
for example, and we can get into this, I have a risk of iron deficiency based on my DNA.
Okay.
But because I eat plenty of foods that have iron and I
Yeah.
understand what symptoms to look out for, I'm not experiencing iron deficiency. But if
Mhm.
anything changes in my health and I start feeling some of those symptoms, then I can go to my family doctor and get a blood test to look at the real-time levels of iron. So
Right.
so it's really complementary. It really puts you in the direction of which other tests you might want to look
Exactly.
into.
It really is complementary because in the functional medicine world, we have this saying that n- it's it's not your DNA, it's your dinner. But
Mhm.
actually, it's, after doing this test, I'm almost want to say, you know what, it's not your dinner, it's your DNA. Because in some ways, after I did this test, I was somewhat liberated because I feel I have certain tendencies of maybe how I want to eat, whether the number of times I want to eat during the day, whether that be, I'm more prone to want to eat, um maybe more like a Mediterranean type diet and not so much, like these fad diets. Like I know for a fact I'm never going to be carnivore. And I
Yeah,
also know that, I sort of tried the keto thing at one time, and I'm just like, this amount of fat consumption is just not feeling right. And then like with my results that came in from the testing, it makes sense.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, let's sort of get into it. So what should I do here, Aaron? Should I give you the stage here and pull up my results?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I have
Okay.
your report ready to go here.
Okay. Sounds good.
So I'm an admin in the system, so my dashboard looks a little bit different from what you saw on the dashboard.
Okay.
Um, Basically, the options are very similar. We have an option to view the PDF version of the report.
Yeah.
This is a printable version, which, as you can see from
Yeah.
here,
That's what I
it's about
yeah.
58 pages long. So
Right.
it's quite
Yeah.
a lot of information.
Yeah,
Um,
I should say that too. It was when I first pulled it up, it was somewhat overwhelming. But as Aaron and I spoke about prior to I press record. If you do want to order this from me, then I would provide you consultation on how to interpret the report too. But that would be totally up to anybody who orders it, whether they want the interpretation or not. But okay,
yeah.
sorry about that, Aaron. Continue.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. This is the pro version of this test, which is not available direct to consumer on the website because it has some more complicated information that we provide that
Mm-hmm.
we prefer that a healthcare provider provides.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, so there is a printable PDF version. It actually does make a nice, coffee table book.
Yeah.
Um, but and I have mine bound in a nice coil bound.
I should do
Presentation
that.
at home.
Yeah.
Um, but that being said, I do find that the web-based version is a lot easier to navigate because it's so comprehensive. So I'm going to
Mm,
open up the web-based version
okay.
here. Now, this is the front page of the report. So when you log in, there's a bit of a welcome letter at the top. and then it shows your name, and here are your results. Now, the test covers 8 broad categories. So we look at diet and heart health, food sensitivities, specific nutrient needs. We look at physical fitness, brain health. We look at your body's detox pathways. We look at obesity risk and hormonal health. And then within each of these broader categories are the results. And if I click to jump into the diet and heart health section, so here we see there are 4 recommendations here. The first one's around fats, carbohydrates, eating for heart health.
And can I ask, this is something I was curious about, like, so 4 things came up for me, but are you saying that, like, I mean, how many categories would there be? Could there be 8 things that come up for somebody else?
In this section, so everyone gets the same
Okay.
full comprehensive test. So there's 4 within the diet and heart health section.
Okay.
And I think there's a total of 45 or so. Females do get a couple extra cards because if we get to the hormonal health section, there are three different recommendations around estrogen. That's only provided to females, but but that's the only difference. And the reason why we use this card approach is a couple reasons. One is mobile friendly. So if you have an iPad or some sort of tablet, it's a great platform to read this. I find myself pulling my report up on my phone still once or twice a week. So it's good for that. But also there's a lot of information here, and it's kept nice and tidy in these cards. We call them cards. But you can always expand to read the entire card. As you can see, there's quite a lot of information here.
Yeah.
Fitting the genes that we look at. So let me, I'll jump through a couple of other sections, and then maybe I'll go through one of the cards in detail, and then we can take it from there.
And I like the recommendations that are made too. Like, it's sort of, don't run to your, your GP or whatever as fast as you can. You're in big trouble. It's sort of like, let's try the DASH diet, for example, and things like that. That's really good.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So this is a genetic test where we're looking at genetic variants that are very commonly found in the population. So we're not looking at, it's not like a genetic risk for things like Huntington's disease, where 1 in 10,000 people have it. If you have the gene, you're going to have the disease. That's not what this is about.
No.
These are genetic variants that, like I said, they're common in the population. Anywhere from 5, 10, 15, 20% of the population have them. Some of these markers are 40% or 50% of the population. There's even 1 or 2 that's even more common to have the variant than to have the quote unquote normal version. So it's really, when Health Canada or other guidelines say that adults need 1,000 units of vitamin D every day, that's based on a whole population, whereas some people might need more, some people might need less. So this test sort of helps you figure out where you stand with respect to that.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So the next category here, this is the food sensitivity section. So we look at alcohol, we look at caffeine, gluten, lactose, and sodium, and we can come back to any of these as we go. This is the nutrient needs section. This is the biggest section of the report. So here we look at iron, omega-3, choline. We look at probiotics, antioxidants, vitamin A, all the vitamins, vitamin A, B, C, D, and E. So
which again is very lovely, because I mean there's some expensive, specific, again, functional medicine tests that do only test your vitamin deficiencies, and another thing too, it's I think it getting something like this makes you realize why you're taking your supplements. Maybe sometimes from time to time we hear a podcast, or we see an article about the importance of taking, let's say, our B vitamins, but when you get results like this back, and it says, well, actually, you don't, you're at risk for I don't know, vitamin B deficiency because you don't have the enzyme to break down, or whatever
Yeah.
that might be. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be a little bit more diligent now about
Mhm.
taking my supplements. I'm not just doing it because I read some article.
Exactly. That's a great point. And I can this brings us to the iron example here. So I mentioned my risk of iron deficiency
Mm-hmm.
before, and I'm going to have that risk for the rest of my life, for my whole life, because my DNA doesn't change. But just because I have the risk of iron deficiency doesn't necessarily mean I need to go run out and get an iron supplement. And in fact, that could be dangerous for me because, I eat plenty
Right.
of food that have iron, and I don't have iron deficiency. I just have the risk. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so let me walk you through that. I can walk you through that card in detail from top to
Sure.
bottom. So at the very top of the card, you can click this plus sign. That reveals, boilerplate text. This is the same on everyone's report. And
Mm-hmm.
it talks about specifically iron and how important iron balance is in the body. Most importantly, it talks about what symptoms of having too little iron look like,
Yeah.
symptoms of having too much iron, and what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like. And I'll come back to that in a second. Then you have this heading. Everything underneath the heading, take action from there down, is tailored to you based on your genetics. So it starts off with a take-home message. It has a why section that gives you a little bit more background and context. And
Mm-hmm.
then at the bottom, it has a section called It's in Your Genes, where we specifically talk about the genes and the
Mm-hmm.
different variants that you might carry. And then at the very
Mm-hmm.
bottom of the card, we actually show the genes and the variants and what's typical, what's atypical, and what your results are. And I can walk you through. So basically, the take-home message for you, this is your report.
Yeah.
It says ensure you are getting enough iron in your diet.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds like a really generic recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
But if we scroll down to the gene section, the reason we're saying that is because you have genetic variants that put you at risk for iron deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So, but because of your genetics, and I can get into this a little bit more, you are not at risk of hemochromatosis or iron overload
Mm-hmm.
because of your genetics. Now, if that was
Mm-hmm.
reversed, then the recommendation would say, limit iron in your diet, go
Right.
get your iron levels tested, go get blood, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
because you have a risk of having too little iron, uh, again, we're not diagnosing an iron deficiency. We're just identifying that you have a risk of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, so
Mm-hmm.
we just tell you what Health Canada says is a good amount of iron.
Yeah.
Um, and basically, if you told me a few years ago that adults need 8 milligrams of iron daily, I wouldn't know what that means. As you can see, this is the web-based version of the report. Another reason why I like this one, the word iron here is a hyperlink. If you click on that, it takes you to food sources of iron, portion
Yeah.
sizes.
Yeah.
So,
That's
so for
wonderful.
me, yeah. So for me, I eat plenty of spinach, tomato, edamame. And in
Mhm.
fact, since I created my report, I'm mindful to make sure I'm eating these foods every week. So
Yes.
I'm eating the foods that have iron. And when I go back up to the top of the card here and look at what symptoms I need to be looking out for, so
Mm-hmm.
that's weakness, extreme fatigue, weakness, chest pain, shortness of breath, and poor appetite. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
eating plenty of the foods. I'm not experiencing the symptoms. So the take home for me is keep doing what I'm doing.
Exactly.
Whereas you were experiencing some of these symptoms, you would know to maybe
Right.
look at your diet, consider a supplement, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. I think I'm doing a pretty good job. And yeah. So, another thing, like just as because it came up, it's sort of like it showed that I don't have any gluten sensitivities. I was okay with gluten. But
Mhm.
when I did like sort of the deep dive with my gut test, the GI map, it showed that
Mhm.
I had, I think higher levels of gliadin antibodies. So, gliadin is, just one of the proteins in, I think it is wheat. But,
Mhm.
when we went back to my carbohydrate, the take action under my carbohydrate was that I should be going towards eating whole grain foods.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of interesting to me. It's sort of like, what was it about my carbohydrate take action that told you that informed me that I should be eating most of my grains as whole grains, low glycemic index grains?
Yeah. Yeah. So I just pulled that card up
Yeah.
here. So that's a great question. And then let me just sort of explain what all these numbers and letters mean at the bottom of the card, because I think that might come in handy or might be important.
Yeah.
So the genes that we're looking at are listed here. So we're looking at the TCF7L2 gene and the CRY1 gene.
Yeah.
And then the RSID number, this funny looking number underneath, this is almost like a postal code of where in the gene. Remember, a gene is just a string of A's, T's, C's, and G's, a bunch of letters.
Yeah.
So this ID number is basically giving us a location within the gene where the typical version is G
Yeah.
and the atypical version of T. And what that means is, we don't like to use the words normal and abnormal or
Right.
good and bad because these variants are so common in the population. If
Well,
something
don't worry, Aaron. A lot of people call me abnormal. So
Sorry.
okay.
So in most cases, the typical is what's more common in the population, and the atypical is less common, and usually associated with some sort of outcome that enables us to tailor the report to you.
Mm-hmm.
So typical or normal is G. The bad version, quote unquote, is T.
Yeah.
And your results are shown here as 2 letters. The reason why there's 2 letters, remember, as I said at the beginning, you have 2 copies of every gene, one from mom, one from dad.
Yeah.
So you inherited a T from mom and a T from dad.
Mm-hmm.
So you have sort of the quote unquote bad version of that gene.
Lucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
And then for the
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say for this other gene, the normal is G, the abnormal is C. You have one of each. That means one parent gave you one, the other parent gave you the other.
Okay.
And that's what's called heterozygote. So
Okay. Right.
often is associated with sort of an intermediate, whereas in this particular case, GG would be the best, CC would be the worst,
Yeah.
and CC would be sort of intermediate. Now, when I say the worst, again, there's nothing to worry about as part of this test because this is very common in the population. It just might be helpful in understanding where you stand.
Yes. And yeah, I'm just going to read out loud what it said under my carbohydrate. It said, no, you can keep it right where it is. It says you carry a version of, this letter gene or whatever, this specific gene that is associated with abnormal insulin synthesis, processing, and secretion when whole grain consumption is low. Oh, that's interesting. It all kind of makes sense when you read it like this, that a high consumption of sugar is, going to be associated with high triglycerides because of the systematic process of, insulin and carbohydrate, etc.
Yeah.
So can you explain that one point that you said, okay, I read abnormal insulin synthesis, processing, and secretion when whole grain consumption is low. So you're telling me, Luella, you need to up your whole grain consumption.
Exactly. Yeah. So all of these recommendations in the report are based on peer-reviewed research studies that show a certain association between a genetic variant and an outcome. So in this particular case, when you have the TT version of this gene, people with that TT version are more likely to have abnormal insulin synthesis when their whole grain consumption is too low. So the recommendation is, make sure your whole grain consumption is higher, and it sort of explains it within the Y section. Whole grains contain more fiber, less likely to spike your blood sugar levels.
Yeah, there you go.
Sort of thing.
Yeah. Stay away from refined carbohydrates. And then again, gluten-free whole grains. Can you just click on that link and let's look what gluten-free whole grains are?
Yeah.
So
you can see them all here. Yeah, rice, white bran or wild rice, buckwheat, corn, cornmeal, millet, oats, quinoa, so on.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, and so you mentioned you mentioned gluten. So let's look at your gluten card here.
Right.
So here, so you know the gold standard genetic test for gluten is looking at 6 different genetic markers within the HLA gene, which is what we're doing here.
Mm.
Basically, they're based on an algorithm. You're either you have exclusion, which is the most definitive finding you can get, and that's actually what you have here. Your HLA genotype, so your results exclude you from being at risk of celiac disease.
Mm.
So that's the most definitive, as I said. And
Yeah.
then other findings could be, low risk, medium risk, high risk, very high risk.
Okay.
And even if you have a high risk of celiac disease, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have celiac disease. Everyone that I've known that has celiac that did this test, their results always say that they're at the highest risk.
Okay.
But the real, the clinical test for celiac disease is, you have to eat gluten every day for a month, and then they look for antibodies in your blood. And if you're celiac, that'll probably kill you.
Right. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
so if you do have that risk, the report, it recommends you can talk to your healthcare provider about being tested for celiac disease, or you might want to just cut it out of your diet and see how you feel.
Right. Yeah. There's
do.
always the elimination diet to get
Yeah.
some good answers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So you shouldn't have any problem with gluten based on this.
Oh, and
Um,
for people too, like, yeah, we should mention that alcohol and caffeine is included in the
mhm.
sensitivity category, which is really nice, right? Because it's something that, I mean, like in terms of what do you want to call it? Societal, like uh, accepted, addictions like alcohol,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
caffeine, and probably even carbohydrates come up as being,
Yeah.
probably the number 3. But so luckily I don't drink alcohol, so I don't have to worry about that. But it's according to my genes, I shouldn't be.
Yeah, and one thing that I should point out here, you might have noticed that some of these recommendations say take action in red,
Yeah.
whereas others just say recommendation in gray.
Right.
Now, what that means is, where it says recommendation in gray, that means you have the quote unquote normal version of the genes that we're looking at,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore the recommendations might not be gene specific, but just general, Health Canada guidelines, for example. Whereas where you do see a red take action, that means you do have a genetic variant that enables us to tailor the recommendation to you based on your genetics.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
for example, if I go down here for caffeine, it just says recommendation here. It looks like you have two, the AA, the good version,
Yeah.
which is actually associated with a fast metabolizer status.
Mm-hmm.
That means when you drink coffee, you can metabolize it quickly.
Yeah,
And I don't know if this matches your experience,
it
but a
does.
lot of people, okay, so a lot of people that have this same genotype, they can drink coffee right before bed
Mm-hmm.
and they're totally fine.
Yeah.
People that
I
are people, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I don't. I usually drink it before like probably 7 a.m. But yeah, it makes sense because I have by mistake drinking caffeinated beverages late in the night, and it, can't say it really made a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So people that have, the CC version of this, they'd be a slow metabolizer of caffeine, which means they drink coffee, they don't clear it out of their system very quickly, so it stays in their body, and they
mm-hmm.
can jittery and they can be up all night if they drink it
Mm-hmm.
coffee too late.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then myself, I have a sort of I'm a medium metabolizer because I have my genotype is AC, so I have
Okay.
one good, one bad, and sometimes I get really jittery, sometimes I don't. When I got my genetic test report for the first time, I actually made a conscious decision to not have a coffee after, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, for example.
Yeah.
And that's sort of something that um, another benefit of doing the genetic test is that the adherence or compliance to any recommendation is improved, right? Like
Exactly.
you can tell your clients, you need to reduce saturated fat in your diet, and they might go do that for a week or two and not experience any immediate improvements in their health. So
Yeah.
they revert back to bad habits. Whereas if you show them their genetic test report and say, look, you have elevated risk of metabolic disease or Alzheimer's disease if you keep your saturated fats too high, then people are going to be much more likely to stick to the recommendations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 So,
Yeah, we just started talking about alcohol there.
mhm,
You can see that you have this version of the ADH1B gene
mhm,
and ADH1C gene, which have some atypical variants, which means taken together, you're more likely to metabolize alcohol slowly, so it
mhm,
stays in your system longer. Um,
mhm.
you might have more pleasurable experiences, which might put you at risk of alcohol use disorder or
Right.
and that sort of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
we.
And I was gonna, that's, yeah, gonna mention that, like, because I work with all sorts of, mental health disorders as well, that, I do have people that come into my office, talking about, well, obviously addictions that they're fighting. And, I guess this type of test shows that, well, generally clients describe themselves as, I mean, I don't use this term, but I often hear them say it is sort of, I have an addictive personality.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's sort of, I mean, it shows here, I guess, that some, for some people, yeah, I mean, I guess they could describe themselves like that. And again, maybe knowing that you have that tendency, like we should really make that statement too, that this sort of, this test shows that you have the tendency. But like you
Mhm.
said with your example of iron, knowing I have that tendency to go down that path, I'm going to make sure my foods are rich in iron. um
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then so knowing I have this tendency with alcohol consumption, I'm going to make sure I stop at one, or
Right.
I mean, some sort of carbohydrate addiction as well, right? I mean, I that's why some
Mhm.
people say, I can't just have one Oreo, or
Right.
like
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
we do have some behavioral genetics recommendations scattered throughout the report,
Hmm.
and it is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, we have one about exercise motivation, and
Yeah, that's
every adult will
interesting.
know whether they're, yeah, every adult really knows whether they're motivated or not.
Yeah.
But when you see it in your genetic test report, it triggers something in your brain to, we recommend people sign up for a class or pay for a class,
Right.
work out with a friend, put in your calendar, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
an interesting.
Let's jump to
Uh,
that, because I really found those areas like super super interesting.
sure, yeah. Yeah, so here's the physical fitness section. So here we look at exercise recovery. So everyone has inflammation when they exercise.
Mhm.
Some people can clear that away quicker than others.
Mhm.
Um, Often, if you do have a risk of slow clearance of that inflammation, there's always recommendations. So everything on this report is what we call actionable. So there's always going to be an action that you can take. In
Mhm.
this case, get adequate rest following exercise. So, if you're in the gym and working on one muscle group, you might want to go back to a different group before coming back to give yourself a bit of extra time to recover.
Right.
There's also, natural products that can be really helpful for that. So like omega-3s in this case.
Yeah, I really
Um,
like the fact that you listed that, because, omega-3 fatty acids come up over and over and over, in my report, but but in most people's report, like the importance of them for brain health, for bringing down inflammation, and for,
yeah,
people that aren't familiar, omega-3 fatty acids, that's usually in the form of a plant-based, ALA, or animal based, which would be more of your fish
the
oil.
DHA.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like, I mean, to me, like, it's something I'm going to put in my diet. Like, I'm either going to be eating,
mhm,
small fish, or I'm going to be taking an omega-3 supplement, bar none. Like, it was
mhm.
sort of a theme in my report as well.
Yeah, and if you want, I can jump into the specific nutrient needs section and look at the omega-3
Sure.
because there is you mentioned something that's really interesting that um, that I like that I like to point out. So under the specific nutrient needs section, we have here omega-3.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it does some people. So there, like you said, there's both animal sources as well as plant based sources of
Mm-hmm.
omega-3s. Some people cannot solely rely on the plant-based sources, and therefore, if they're vegan, they might not be getting enough of the right type of omega-3. So
Right.
they can always supplement. They can either supplement with a fish oil or there's an algal oil, um, as it's mentioned here,
Yeah.
that also contains that DHA.
Yeah.
So for you personally, you can see here it does say plant sources will not suffice as your sole source of omega-3. So for you, if you are vegan or if you're not eating any animal products, you might want to consider that algal oil supplement so that
Yeah.
you get all the right amounts.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there's a similar story with vitamin A. It's very common that, so it's the gene that we look at here basically converts beta carotene, which is a weird looking molecule found in orange vegetables like carrots and sweet potato and yam and
Right.
leafy greens. So our bodies take beta carotene and convert it into active vitamin A.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that using an enzyme that's encoded by this gene, the BCMO1 gene. Now, a lot of people have a version of that gene, and yourself included, and myself included, actually, it's quite common, that we might have a reduced ability to convert the beta carotene into active vitamin A. So you can always get active vitamin A in supplements or in animal products like fish and meat and milk and cheese and eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you were or I were vegan and we ate a truckload of carrots, our skin would actually turn orange before we have enough vitamin A in our system.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not always like a too little, too much, but also the source of where you get it.
The source and yeah, like you say, I mean, you know, yeah, you could be saying, oh, I have a yeah, yeah, I eat tons of sweet potato and carrots and oranges, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting the active vitamin A that you need. Yeah, that's a really good point. So
Mhm.
another reason why these tests are very important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you might notice,
What can I
yeah,
ask you one other thing under
sure, yeah,
that nutrient
yeah,
profile is I think it's great that you included choline, but like why? How did you guys decide to to show,
yeah. Um, well, just when we're doing our research that went into this,
yeah.
and this was a multi-year process with a big
Mm-hmm.
team of
Yeah,
researchers.
I can
Um,
imagine.
so we were looking for um, uh, basically strong evidence of how we can use our genes to better understand what diets would be best for us.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the ones that came up. We actually had like about 300 different genes listed, and we actually threw out a lot of them because we there wasn't enough evidence in the literature to really support a recommendation. Um, so here in this particular case, we're looking at two genes, the FADS1 gene or FADS1 gene and the PMT gene. Um, and together they basically convert different forms of unsaturated fatty acids, which basically make up components of our cell membranes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and basically these, if you have uh, for you, you just have this one C here. That's the atypical
Yeah.
out of these four possibilities. But
Yeah.
that's the studies have shown that that C is enough to show that there's an association with lower than normal phosphatidylcholine levels. So the
Right.
recommendation would be that make sure you're getting enough choline in your diet. Choline is found in things like beef liver, eggs, mushrooms, and so on. So you have
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
foods.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah.
I picked up some
Um,
liver today, actually. Looking forward to that. Actually, I make sort of a liver pate. Like I'm not too big on just frying it up with onions, but I make my own liver
Yeah,
pate and yeah,
That's very
it's
nice.
quite good. So
Yeah, it's really one thing I've learned is that's probably the most the thing that's most rich in a lot of these nutrients.
it really is. Like that's what I was thinking too. Like I mean, it just made me realize I want to up my like small fish like sardines, mackerel,
Mhm.
oysters because they're so nutrient dense and they cover a
Mhm.
lot of these areas, that
Yeah,
are showing up for deficiencies for me.
yeah,
Liver, so it's not necessarily always, eat more fruits and vegetables either. It's
yeah,
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 we gotta take a big
yeah. And it's not just have more of this vitamin, have more of this
right,
version of the vitamin.
right.
Uh,
Yeah. So
so
okay,
yeah.
okay, I guess
Did
we
you want
should
to jump
jump.
into the mental health section?
Yes, let's go into the mental health. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two ways to do this. You can always click back to the action plan that brings you back here, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can jump into the brain health section here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, at the top of the report, you have the
Oh,
categories. You can always jump the categories here as well.
okay, great.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so let's go into the brain health section. So in
Mm-hmm.
this section, we look at mood, we look at addiction, memory, we look at stress, and then we also
Mm-hmm.
look at this Alzheimer's disease risk
Yeah.
card as well.
Yeah.
Um, so, it's kind of interesting, like this, for example, this stress one. You might have heard this gene being
Yep.
referred to as the worrier or warrior gene.
Yep.
So basically, it's an enzyme. The way I view it, or the way I understand it, it's an enzyme that clears out neurotransmitters from the brain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you have a slow version of this enzyme, you're what's called a worrier, like
Mm-hmm.
I am.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that means you have a thought, the dopamine in your brain is not cleared out quickly enough. So you end up dwelling on things, overthinking things, stressing out about things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, worriers do tend to do better at cognitive tests, but they can also be stressed out. If you have the warrior version of the gene, it's a faster working enzyme. So you have a thought, the dopamine's cleared out really quickly, and then you can move on to the next thought. So you don't really stress or worry about it too
Mm-hmm.
much. Warriors tend to be more risk taking, but it's all about a balance. And if you're too much of a warrior, they tend to do more poorly at cognitive tasks.
Yeah,
So it's good
I
to have a
I'm not
balance.
a worrier. I can't say I'm a worrier. I'm almost too lackadaisical in some ways, I feel, but
And that's sort of that's consistent with what we're seeing here because it looks like you do have the warrior.
okay.
uh,
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, reduced memory, I can definitely relate to that. I feel like yeah, I definitely do.
yeah,
So it says, yeah, L-tyrosine and L-dopa and zinc, vitamin B6, folate. Like these are common things. I'll just let the audience know that are coming up. So which is nice because if it was every sort of mineral and vitamin under the sun, you'd be going, oh my goodness. But that's what I mean. I just decided there's some foods that I'm going to really prioritize in my diet now.
yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure. And for those that have the warrior
Right.
version of this gene, like myself,
Hmm.
that enzyme uses magnesium as a cofactor. So it's
Mm.
recommended that I eat foods with magnesium, maybe supplement with magnesium. And that's why if you're into supplements
Yep.
and that sort of thing, you might have heard that the B vitamins or magnesium is good for the stress,
For
and
sure,
that's
for
why.
brain health. Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Vitamin C as well. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Um, this, if you'd like, we can go through the Alzheimer's
yeah,
risk
I think that
here.
I
So
think
this
it's
is,
important because a lot of
yeah,
people are, probably terrified of something like that,
yeah,
especially if they have aging parents, are they wondering, am I next sort of thing. But again, this is information for you to take action and um yeah,
yeah,
it's sort of like it this is where you change your dinner,
yeah,
and not
yeah,
your
for sure.
DNA.
Yeah, exactly. So this is an interesting gene, and it's actually one of the more sought after pieces of genetic information out there because it's
Yes.
been in the media a lot.
Yeah.
And it's very important to understand that people that have the risk factor aren't guaranteed to get Alzheimer's. People that don't have the risk factor, doesn't mean that you can go live a terrible lifestyle and be in
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
clear. So you really have to understand. But basically, this gene, it's ApoE. It stands for apolipoprotein E. So this is a lipid metabolizing enzyme. So it's an enzyme that breaks down fats, like cholesterol. And what happens if you have the slow version of this gene,
Yeah.
then fat plaques can build up in your brain over time.
Yeah.
And this is specifically showing a risk for late onset Alzheimer's, which hits, in your 70s or 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very late in life. And
Okay.
the reason is because it's a lifetime accumulation of these fats. So understanding if you carry that risk factor at a younger age, you can adjust your diet and give yourself a better chance of not getting that disease down the road.
Right.
So that's why I think it's a very important one to understand.
And that's interesting. It's the first time I hear it kind of explained like that, but that makes a lot of sense too, because I am at risk for cardiovascular disease because um I'm quite positive, even though it's not really confirmed, but I believe we have familial hypocholesterolemia. So meaning that, my cholesterol, despite what I like, despite my diet, despite the amount of exercise I do, it's really hard for me to bring down my cholesterol.
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah. And that's
yeah.
exactly what it actually says for
Oh yeah.
for you here. So there's actually based on these two genetic variants that we look at in this one gene, there are three different versions of the gene that exist. There's the E2, E3, and E4 versions.
Mm-hmm.
So the E2 version is sort of protective for Alzheimer's disease because it's a fast functioning enzyme. So it's slightly protective for Alzheimer's. The E4 is the Alzheimer's risk factor, and you have one of each, so they sort of cancel each other out in a way.
Mm.
So it does result in a slightly increased risk for late onset Alzheimer's based on this combination.
Okay.
And then the E2 there is showing an elevated risk of this familial hypercholesterolemia.
Yeah.
So it's sort of consistent with what your experience is, which is
Yeah.
interesting. Um, there's also the E3 version of the gene, which is the quote unquote normal version of the gene. So if you're E3, you have the normal risk of Alzheimer's.
Mm.
E3, E4, you have a threefold risk. E4, you have a 16-fold increased risk. So it jumps up from there. But
Mm.
again, understanding that you carry this, it's a lifestyle disease in a
Yes.
way. You can change your diet and give yourself a better chance of not getting it.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all makes sense. Like really it's what I find is, how would I describe it? It to me it's verifies that, we shouldn't be talking about our body as all these different compartments, nor should we have, you know, like really specialists like in that sense, like the liver, liver, gut, gastro intestinal,
Mhm.
like I mean it's just the body should be looked at as a system, because we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, but we're also talking about heart disease,
Yeah.
because the common factor here is how I metabolize fat in the liver.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, but the body should be looked at as a system, because it's going to have downstream effects everywhere. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
yeah, like, and I'll be honest too, when I was first looking at the report, I was almost like with a pen and paper going, okay, so the next trip to my supplement store I'm picking up, and I almost started, and I was like, okay, wait. The no, no, we're gonna go to food first.
Yes.
But like you mentioned with the vitamin A, though, I mean, I don't, I have, how did you describe it again? The beta carotene is not um
It's not converted into
converted
active vitamin A.
active vitamin A.
It's
So
active.
that's an example there where I might need to supplement.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah, so I guess did we cover almost all categories? Just
There's a couple of others. There's a detox
oh right.
section for here. This is, we're always cleaning out toxins in the food that we eat, in the air that we breathe. And there's just
Mm-hmm.
general biochemical processes that are always happening within your body, and that's creating metabolites that you have to get rid of. So we look at a bunch of these different pathways. And again, this is very similar to the what we just discussed about Alzheimer's. Some illness is based on a lifetime accumulation of toxins in your body. So
Right.
understanding these pathways and how to support them can be very important.
Yeah.
So we look at our ability to remove, the polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are toxins found in the charred bits of meat.
Yeah,
We
which we all love to chomp down on. No, I
yeah,
know.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We look at histamine removal. This has been helpful for me personally because I have seasonal allergies. So I
Okay.
learn which foods I should focus on and which foods to avoid.
Yeah.
Um, we look at
Yeah.
sulfur removal. And this is an interesting one. We look at the glutathione detox pathway as well. So
It
this is
is.
a big pathway that a lot of naturopathic doctors like to look at,
Mm-hmm.
other functional medicine docs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, in this particular card here or recommendation, uh, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, so we look at a whole bunch of different genes here, and we actually have a family of genes called the GST genes. It stands for glutathione S transferase. And
Yes.
basically what it does is, you have a toxin in your body, you have an enzyme that takes glutathione, which is a little molecule, and sticks it onto it. So those enzymes transfer the glutathione onto it. That's why they're called
Yeah.
glutathione transferases.
Transferase. Yeah.
Once the toxin has that glutathione marker on it, then it's degraded. It's removed from your body.
Right.
So
That's why they
so
say
there's a
glutathione. The like glutathione is like the most what would you say? Um well,
one of the more
potent.
important
Yeah,
pathways. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Detoxifier. Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So here we look at a gene called GSTP1. It looks like you have, quote unquote, one good, one bad of that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look at these two GST enzymes at the bottom here, we don't actually show letters the way we do with everything else in the report. So
Mm-hmm.
here we look at, it's not just these single changes of the letters are called SNPs. We didn't really get into that at the beginning.
Right.
That's one type of genetic variant,
Yeah.
but there's other types of genetic variations. This one is called a copy number variation, or CNV. So remember, I told you at the beginning, you have two copies of every gene, one from mom, one from dad.
Yeah.
That's the rule, but there are some exceptions to the rule.
Mm.
And these GST enzymes are actually very commonly found to be missing in people. So
Mm.
instead of the normal two copies, you might have one copy or zero copies. And in fact, it's so common that I think it's GSTM1. I think 50% of the population is missing at least one of these genes.
Oh.
So here, for the GST1, it looks like you have the normal two copies, but for GSTM1, it looks like you're missing the gene completely. So you don't
Yeah.
have any GSTM activity, which means that your ability to remove toxins using the glutathione pathway might be slightly reduced, and
Mm-hmm.
that pathway might need a little bit of support. The
Yeah.
cruciferous vegetables is what's really recommended to support the
Exactly.
pathway, as you
Yeah.
probably know. So that's something to
Yeah.
focus
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's other supplements like lipoic acid
on.
and
Yeah,
well, and then bone broth is a really good
mm,
way of supporting your detox pathways and
yeah,
yeah, NAC, yeah, you got that
yeah,
listed there,
yeah,
magnesium, selenium. Yeah,
yeah.
great.
So
Uh,
definitely a lot of foods to help you out there.
yeah, yeah, and it's such an important thing to look at. I mean, especially as our world gets more and more, our natural resources are being depleted and more and more more and more processed foods, I guess, less and less nutrients in the soil. I mean, and especially
Mhm,
for women that wear, makeup daily. I mean, there's just so many
mhm.
areas that you can start by your cleaning products, of course, that you can just
Yeah,
start like choosing better
Yeah.
quality natural products as much as you
Yeah.
can, as much as you can afford with organic foods, etc. Like everything you can do is going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Even being around pesticides
oh,
can
absolutely.
use as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So that
yeah.
just to finish off, because there are a couple other categories. I'll
Yeah,
just
no,
quickly
it's
show us. So there's an obesity risk section. This is pretty straightforward. We look at genes associated with regulating appetite.
yeah.
We look at eating behavior.
Yeah,
We have
eating
this
like
general.
listen to
Yeah.
that, like folks, like eating behavior and genetic risk score for obesity and regulation of appetite. Like I that's amazing that, this is coming up on, your in your genetics. I find that's just amazing. And that's what I wanted to touch on in terms of, women that beat themselves up, especially. I mean, there are men that come into my office as well, but especially women because, of our long-term body image issues that, why can't I just have one, in
Mhm.
terms of regulation of appetite and food intake? Or yeah, like under my eating behavior, I think it's sort of explained that um oh, like what I understood from it, it was like I like eating small amounts almost throughout the day, but then my risk was kind of up because, like, my risk for obesity might be up a little bit because, you're not really regulating your hunger very much or something like that. But like I just find it really interesting because I remember like my mom always called me a grazer, a snacker. And
Yeah.
now I can like show her this and go, well, see, I mean, I'm just like it's for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, especially when the results match your experience, right?
Yeah, for so many things, like even like with the exercise thing, like I do like hardcore stuff, I mean, I do like I like endurance, but I ran marathons in my time, and like it just kind of all makes sense. It's sort of
Yeah.
like, oh, I can just accept me, which is one of the
Yeah.
things I really try to, help my clients with, is just sort of like, you are your own, like I always say, special snowflake, and
Yeah.
you can say
Yeah.
in terms of my genes, even like there's no one
Yeah.
else like me. And
Hmm.
if you have tendencies for something, like just respect that. And it's, don't judge yourself. Don't say, oh, I should do yoga more because, everybody's telling me how good yoga is, but, I just want to be like a Forrest Gump. Well, like, okay, like you are, you're special. Like, so you don't have to do, or you shouldn't be doing everything that you're being told that you should be doing unless you're
Exactly.
breaking down, right?
Yeah.
Unless,
Yeah.
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 So,
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah. And then just the last section of the report is the hormonal health
oh,
section. So I
right. Oh
sort
my
of touched
gosh.
on this.
Yeah. Forgot
Yeah.
about
So
this.
it's quite a lot, a lot of information you're getting here.
Yeah.
So here we look at thyroid and testosterone. And then, as I mentioned, in female reports, we really break down estrogen into a very deep way. So
Mm-hmm.
we look at your body's ability to remove estrogen metabolites. This is sort of the phase one
Yeah.
detox of estrogen. And then we also look at phase two, looking at estrogen detox through both the methylation pathway and again, that same glutathione pathway, which we just talked about before. So
Exactly.
this can
And
be really helpful.
really
Yeah.
helpful in terms of risk for breast cancer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
If you're
Um,
well, I mean, many different types of cancers, but if it's going
yeah,
down the wrong, if your estrogen is going down the wrong detox pathway, then you're going to be at higher risk for cancer. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and this is another. So at the very beginning, we started talking about how these blood tests and urine tests are very complementary to
Hmm.
this type of testing. So,
Right.
and this is a great example. So for estrogen metabolites, we see here that someone might have, so for example, you have a risk of having an increase in the 4-hydroxyestrogen,
Yes.
which can be harmful, and you
Yes.
have a reduced production of 2-hydroxyestrogen, which is protective.
Right.
So what you can do, understanding that, your DNA is not going to change,
Mm-hmm.
you can, follow the recommendations here,
Yeah.
and then periodically do one of these urine hormone tests. There's one called the Dutch
Exactly.
test or the
Yeah.
complete hormone profile, and
Yeah.
that'll tell you that your real-time levels of these estrogen
Yeah.
metabolites.
Which, I should say that I have taken the Dutch, hormone testing, and it's looking good on there. So that tells me that I'm doing the right things. I'm
Yeah,
increasing, my consumption of, cruciferous vegetables, flaxseed, for
yeah,
example, taking my B vitamins.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it makes a difference.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
so these 3 cards here can really help figure out what your unique program should be in order to keep those
Mm-hmm.
metabolites in check. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, again, it's really okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Wait, under estrogen metabolites, it talks about caffeine. Okay. Or below 300 for postmenopause. Okay, what? Okay, okay, yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. I just got um distracted there. But it's just I think a really, if anybody was ever thinking of, I mean, that's one thing in Canada, right? I think when I compare working in the functional medicine realm in Canada compared to, I think, functional medicine practitioners in the States, in the States, they're used to paying for
Mhm.
their health, their
Yes.
Medicare, right? In
Yeah.
Canada, we come from the mindset of it should be all free. But
Yes.
from what you're saying here, for in and around, $300, maybe a bit more if you want some interpretation,
Mhm.
you can get a heck of a lot of information that you're not going to get, having your yearly physical.
Yeah.
And I like the red, bold, words under these different categories that says take action, meaning that
Mhm.
you can be the driver, of your life and your health by, and it wouldn't take long either. Like if you're low on certain things, or if certain pathways are slower for you, or you don't have certain enzymes, all you have to do is click on the hyperlinks here that, like,
Yeah.
that you
Exactly.
showed, gives like tons of suggestions for the types of foods and or
Mhm.
different lifestyle um yeah, recommendations that you could do. And there you go, you
Yeah.
know yeah. And just to note too, under thyroid health, I know it says take action, and I can also verify that, yes, I've low thyroid is something I have to watch over, because I've seen that, and I've seen
Yeah.
it in my mom and my sister
Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's the PDE8B gene, which would have reduced thyroid function and then
Mm-hmm.
higher than normal TSH levels,
Yeah.
is associated with that. So
Yep.
yeah, like I
Yep.
said, a lot of what, in my experience, there's so many things on this report that is consistent with your experience,
Mm-hmm.
and then it sort of strengthens the recommendations in other areas as well. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's what can I say? Like it's certainly not something that you should look at the results and become alarmed or scared. It's in
exactly,
fact the opposite. It's
yeah, yeah.
it just,
Knowledge is power. Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Um
no, I agree 100%. And again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but just want to reiterate, there's no scary information on here.
no.
There are genetic variants that are very commonly found in the population. Everyone has them. Everyone has lots of red on their report. So if you
Right.
see a lot of red, you shouldn't worry about it.
Yeah.
But it just, gives you some tools and some extra
Mm-hmm.
knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So much more than the once a year annual physical where, I mean, okay, looks like your numbers are in this range. You're good. We'll see you
Yeah.
next year. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, well, congratulations on such, I can't imagine. I mean, thank you for coming back to Canada, by the way.
Yeah. No, it's,
You
I'm happy to be back. Interesting
you
chatting
didn't
here.
stay at Yale. So,
Yeah.
yeah, good for you. Um,
Yeah.
no, yeah, you must be very proud.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how this report came out. We originally started our company around a different test that looks at drug metabolism. So if you're on medications, it can be helpful in figuring out what drug would work, what drug won't work.
Okay,
Um, and but we realized drugs just don't work as well as they should. And
right.
there's a lot you can do with foods and nutrition and lifestyle that could be
Mm,
preventative that can be informed with your genetics. So that's
yeah.
why we endeavored to develop this other test.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah,
great. So you're saying like if you were taking a medication like a SSRI or something like that and it wasn't working, then it would show it in that type of testing that you're done doing why it's not
exactly.
working.
Yeah.
Okay,
So exactly. So
good.
it's very similar to how I described it for caffeine. So if
Right.
you imagine that you metabolize a drug too slowly,
Mm-hmm.
it'll build up in your system, especially if you're taking a dose the next day and the next day. Suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
the levels in your body are going to be too high or
Mm-hmm.
toxic, and you can have unwanted side effects.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you metabolize a drug too quickly, you take the drug and it flows through you so fast that it never really accumulates to therapeutic levels. So
Right.
those enzymes are so well characterized, so much
Mm.
so that there's actually guidelines for prescribers that tell you how to prescribe given certain genetic variants that a patient might have.
Okay.
It was sort of the
Okay.
low hanging fruit of personalized medicine
Mm.
because the guidelines are there, the genes are well characterized. All that was missing was a simple report. So
Right.
we
Right.
that's our first test. It's called Match My Meds.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I saw that there was more than one, yeah, in your bio there. Okay. Great.
yeah.
Okay. Well, anything else you want to let our listeners know?
No, I think we went through quite a lot.
We
It's
did go
great.
through quite a
Uh,
quite a lot, probably a lot of information. And so, yeah, I would really recommend for the podcast listeners to maybe hop on YouTube. I think you're going to get more from that if you see the video that goes along with this, because I think you'll be able to, yeah, see all the categories nicely. And yeah, and so
cool.
if anybody is interested in the test, they can contact me and I can, rearrange that if they want some help with the interpretation. Otherwise, they can probably go straight to you, and either way works.
Yeah, yeah. So the test that we went through is the pro version that's only
Right.
available through healthcare providers.
Okay.
The one that's available direct to consumer on our website is missing a few of the things like the cardiovascular risk, the Alzheimer's disease risk. The
Mm,
estrogen isn't as detailed. The
mm,
glutathione is not as detailed.
mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's if you want all that
Mm-hmm.
information, then you can get the pro version
Yeah,
for you.
and like one other thing too, I'll just say it's sort of like now you just remind me, I've had women that have had breast cancer, and when you get cancer, the first question you ask is why me?
Yeah,
When but again, it's sort of like, okay, well, maybe part of this is genetics. Like, you are doing all the right things. That's what it's like you have a great life. Well, you eat well, it's sort of like, but yeah, but now that we know a little bit more about, let's say, how estrogen is broken down, for example, for you, that we need to be a little bit more hardcore in your diet or your lifestyle.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I think even for me, in terms of cholesterol, um, if I wasn't as adamant as I was around like my exercise and my diet, I mean, I think I would have, it'd be huge risk for cardiovascular disease at this point.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah. It's
And
my pleasure. My
okay.
pleasure.
And well, if anything new, changes in the testing in upcoming years, I'm sure we'll have you back on.
Yeah, we're always developing new tests. We actually maybe this topic of another uh,
Mm-hmm.
podcast, but we have a fertility add-on that we have to
Oh,
this
wow.
test for which can be helpful for young couples trying to conceive.
Oh,
Really,
great.
we look at we have like both indirect and direct factors. So what I mean by indirect is you know, as we saw today, we know what genes are involved or are associated with things like iron deficiency. If iron deficiency has an impact on egg
Mm,
quality or sperm quality, then it's presented in that light. So we have
absolutely.
both the indirect as well as some direct factors that influence fertility
Oh,
as well.
yeah. And that's, to me, that's becoming such a, well, epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
like, fertility issues. It's just,
Yeah,
it just seems, and I think it's related a lot to the toxins in our environment. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
so yeah, if you're not a good detoxifier, then you better take some action. So,
yeah,
all right,
exactly.
Aaron, I'll let you get on with your evening. And thanks again so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. This has been
Okay.
fun.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye bye.